All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Johnny Hudson. I have Elise Bailey here with me. So we're going to be presenting on how to present your research, posters and presentations. So this is going to cover a few different topics. It's going to cover how you want to create a research poster, how you want to create a PowerPoint if you're going to give a talk. What was the other thing?
Conferences.
How to prepare for conferences and what to expect there, and how to actually give a talk when you're doing it, what to do beforehand, what to do during it, and what to do afterward. So first, research posters. So making a research poster is a lot like making a condensed down version of a research paper. So generally, you're going to have the four main sections that we see when making a paper. So you're going to have an introduction section, a methods section, a results section, and a discussion section. This isn't exactly hard and fast, but it's typically like the standard template of how to make a poster. So big details first, you're going to want a creative and unique title. Now you can see that my title is a little bit bland. That's because I'm scared of being unique. However, you can do any sort of thing you want regarding that. I think one of my peers had one like hate is a virus, talking about social media use and racism during COVID-19. So that would be like a unique title that you could use. Also, as you can see, there are a list of authors. The order of the authors in a poster presentation is something I'll talk about a little bit later. But as you can see, we've put where the author is from. So if everybody isn't presenting from, or everybody who worked on the poster isn't from the same university, you're going to want to note that and say where all the people are from. Also, you're going to want to have logos that show the different contributing factors to your poster. So first, I attend Arizona State University. So I have a logo of Arizona State University showing that this is the institution I go to. We received NSF funding for this project, so we have an NSF logo. Our project is the Bully Blocker project, so we have this Bully Blocker logo. And finally, one of our professors just moved, and they are now a professor at Loyola University in Chicago. So there's a symbol for the Loyola University as well. So after you've gotten your title and your banner done, you want to look at the different parts of your, the meat and potatoes of what you're going to be talking about. So usually it's what a research paper is, but really boiled down and simplified so that a person who's looking at it can come and they can see the gist of what you did for your research. So like a simplified introduction section, a simplified methods, explain the key variables that you were looking at in your study, a results section talking about all the analyses you did. Importantly, you want a lot of figures as well. Usually figures are a really good way to represent what you did on a visual basis so that it's not so conceptual for the people who are looking at your paper or the people who are looking at your poster. You also want graphs and diagrams to show your findings so that they're a little more obvious, because reading through all the numbers and statistics can be a little hard, especially if the person isn't familiar with your area. Showing a graph of your findings can often help simplify that. And finally, a discussion section. You can also break this down into a discussion and a conclusion section. So the discussion being some of your findings, and the conclusions talking about the limitations and future directions and the basic things you found within that within the study that you conducted. Also, there's a reference section. So this is really important. Just like a research paper, you needed to have some kind of background research for your introduction section at the very least. Oftentimes you'll have references for your methods and discussion as well. That just goes with the territory of the background research. So you want to talk about, or you don't want to talk about, but you want to show your references so people know where you got your claims from, just like you would in a research paper. As you can see, the references I have are a little bit smaller. That's because there are so many of them. So you can have a smaller version with the font a little bit squished so that you can fit everything in. This is just for people who want to look at them and see where you got your sources from. Finally, I also have an acknowledgement section here that shows that this research was funded by the NSF and what award number there was. If you had funding from other places, this is where you would put that information. Also, not all research papers have to look exactly like that. So this one is still a psychological paper. However, it was a little more computer science heavy. And as you can see, I still have the same symbols I talked about earlier. I still have the list of authors. I still have a creative and unique title, though this one isn't quite as creative either. However, this one isn't broken down into exactly like an intro, methods, results, and discussion. However, it still follows the same format. You still have an introduction into the topic. We're still talking about the data collection and how we collected the data, definition, stuff like that. And you also have, so this one was more of a proposed research route. This was some data that we'd collected and were in the process of analyzing, but we hadn't published anything yet, and we weren't sure on the findings yet. So you can also make presentations on that that aren't quite the traditional standard template focused, and it works just as well. So those are two types of posters you can make. Some small nitty-gritty things you probably want to focus on when making these posters as well. So I made these posters using Microsoft PowerPoint. You can go in and mess with the settings so that the graph turns out square instead of as a longer rectangle. All of that stuff is there. However, you want to make sure that you can fit as much information you can as possible, especially for bigger papers, right? So you're going to usually have 10, 15 pages of manuscript, even more pages of diagrams and tables and stuff. So usually you can't fit all of that onto just one poster. You want to take the most important parts, the parts that you want to talk about, boil it down, and put the most important graphs that pertain to your research and findings, and put that onto your poster. Sometimes, so for this poster in particular, it was secondary research data analysis on a data set we'd already collected stuff on, and was on a very particular thing. So we didn't quite have as much to talk about. So as you can see, there aren't a ton of graphs, but most of the data will look like this, where you have a ton of findings and you can't quite fit everything onto it. So you want to conserve space. You want to limit how many words you're putting on and add diagrams and pictures, because people have a lot easier time understanding that. You want to do basic things like standardizing a font and a font style and a font size so that it's consistent throughout the paper. You want an acknowledgements and a references section. So those are the big basics of how to make a poster.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to continue this presentation with the PowerPoint presentations. All right, I'm back. Okay, so first we're going to start with a couple different websites that you can use. So besides the layouts that are available on PowerPoint, here are some helpful templates. So there's SlidesGo that has numerous templates you can choose from. Same with Slides Carnival. Then when you're looking for images and icons to be using in your slides to kind of at least draw the attention of the audience, there's StorySet, which I'll also show you in non-projects. So SlidesGo, I have used numerous times, and it's going to have the same kind of steps that are the same with Slides Carnival. Basically, you can search or select a certain category. You can preview it before you even download, and then you just save it and it will download and then open up into PowerPoint. Here is just the interface, the Slides Carnival, just kind of give you an idea. So you can kind of see the topics up on the top: formal, inspirational, creative, simple, startup, elegant, playful, and business. You can also type in your own search term if there's a certain, I guess, style that you are specifically looking for based off the research you're presenting. Then StorySet. So StorySet's really cool because it has images that you can use, but you can also customize them. So for example, I just looked up researcher for this image. When you do that and then you click on it, you can change the color of it, and then you can also remove certain layers that are in the photo. So if you wanted to remove the microscope, you could do that. If you wanted to remove the bottle, you could do that. You could even remove the character. So with this website, it really adds to your presentation, especially if it involves people, because that is what's in all the images. The noun project will allow you to look up icons, but also images. So for this one, I just looked up studying, and these are the icons that first came up. There's also artists that make their own folder. So you can also, if there's certain artists you like and how they make it, you can also look within their folder, not every icon available. So here are two examples. So the one on the bottom left, I had used Slides Go and then the noun project for the icons. And then I used the noun project for the image as well. For the one up on the right top, I had used Slides Carnival, and then I had then used the slide, the StorySet icons. So besides, at least having a template picked out and kind of knowing where you're starting, what should really be included on a slide? So you really don't want to make it look too busy or where it'll like distract the audience member, where they think they're to be reading what you have on your slide besides listening to you. So you want brief background, and the most important information is the key findings. You want this to really like pop out to the audience so that they can kind of see why you're talking about this topic to begin with. You want to make sure that you always include your citations. These can be either on the bottom of the slide, or it can also be just after each point you're making. You also want to make sure then you have your reference slide at the end of the presentation. Other considerations for your presentation. So charts and graphs are pretty for introducing your results to the audience. There's also smart art that is within PowerPoint, which is this image right here, where you can, if you're discussing a process, a list, any kind of relationship within the variables, these are great visual, I guess like visual aids to at least get your main points across without adding too many words to your slide. And then of course, most importantly is also then the order of your slides. So the title page should always include your title, your name, and then if you're working with an advisor, include their name, and then any other professors that are aiding the project. You will then want to include the background. So you're going to include information about the variables in the study and any previous research, as well as gaps in the research. You will then introduce the proposed analyses. So for this, you always want to include the diagram and kind of show what you are predicting or what you did predict when you did this research. You would then include the information of the procedures, the measures, and the participants that were recruited. And then finally, you would include your results in discussion. So you would conclude what findings are made, and then also the future direction of the research, or like what you could do differently next time. So when you are giving a presentation, it's important to prepare right before that before you give it. So when you're preparing, you want to make sure that you are practicing. So if you need notes, make sure that you have those already written out and that you are like familiar with the notes before you do present. It's also important to consider time constraints. For many of the projects that students have, they might have a limit where it could be 12 minutes or under 20 minutes. So it's good to time yourself, because even timing yourself will kind of let you know what information might need to be cut out so you can discuss more important points. Essentially then it could also show you at least the order of the presentation if you need to, I guess, modify. So I always recommend it's good to time yourself and record yourself and then review it, because then you can tell if you need to add in a transition. You can tell if it's actually making sense to the audience member. You can tell if you're rushing through the presentation. And it's always good to get feedback through peer as well. And then once you review, it's always good to modify. And you want to keep going through this process of practicing, time yourself, recording, and reviewing and modifying until you're pleased with how the end result is going to be portrayed. So during the talk, so I know during the talk sometimes can be very like nerve-wracking, but it's always good that preparation beforehand can help you. So you want to present professionally. So this is more than just how you're speaking, but it's also how you're dressing. Not saying you need to wear a suit, tie, or dress or anything like that, but come dressed at least professionally in a casual manner. If you have notes, make sure they're nearby and they're in the order that's going to help you. You also want to make sure that you introduce yourself and your advisor as part of the study. Make eye contact as much as possible. It's okay to look down periodically, but you don't want to be looking down the whole time. Also, make sure you speak loudly and clearly so the audience members can hear you, especially the ones sitting in the back. So as I mentioned, as a don't, you do not want to be looking down the whole time. So if you're looking at your notes or slides the whole time, you're not really engaging with the audience. Where you don't want to wear inappropriate clothing. And if you do make a mistake, keep going. I'm sure you're going to notice it way more than anyone else would. So it's just best to always continue through your presentation. After the talk, you're going to thank the audience, and then you're going to ask if anyone has any questions. It's best to always clarify with someone asking the question if you're unsure about what they're asking. And make sure you take the time to also answer the question as fully as possible. It's okay not to know all the answers. And at least for students, usually an advisor, if they're working with you on the study, will chime in and kind of aid with your answer if you're unsure of what to say.
All right, and let's finish up with conferences. Now, why would you want to go for a conference? There are a lot of reasons and a lot of things to consider before going to a conference, but personally, if you're interested in psychology and psychological research, I think that going to a conference is a must, and I'll go over that in a little bit. But first, you want to consider what type of research you're conducting and what type of research the conference is interested in. For example, if you are a social psychologist or a social psychology graduate student and you attend a neurology conference, while that might be interesting, it might not relate to the field that you're working in or the research you're doing. Likewise, if you submit any presentations or posters to that conference, they're probably not going to accept you because your interests lie in different areas. So first, you want to make sure that the research you're doing is tailored to the conference you're going to, or at the very least, make sure that the conference you're going to is appropriate for the research that you're submitting. Also, there are costs associated with attending. Depending on what programs you're associated with at ASU or a part of with ASU, some of these costs can be waived or reimbursed depending, but a lot of the time, if you're going to go as a guest, especially as an undergraduate, you have to pay that out of pocket. So that might be something that could deter you from going to a conference. However, if you're usually working with a research project or a group with professors and funding and stuff, they can usually cover those costs, or they can usually find avenues within the university to cover those costs. So it's important to know where you can get that funding and how you can get that funding before you decide to attend a conference. Additionally, with the rise of COVID-19, attendance for in-person conferences have become a little iffy. Now, at the very least, there's an option to attend virtually or in person. Some of those virtual conferences have become more in person as COVID's progressed on and we've become more better adapted to the situation. And I don't know how permanent this situation is going to be, but right now, usually conferences have an option of attending virtually or in person. And that's another consideration for you to make. If you don't have the funding and the registration fee is going to basically be all you can pay for, maybe attending virtually would be the route you'd want to go. Or if you're really interested in networking and meeting people and presenting in person, then you'd want to go in person. However, that's a personal decision and there are a lot that goes into that, but it's just something to consider in case you cannot attend in person at all, but you still want to present at the conference. Additionally, you don't have to go to a conference as a presenter. You can just attend as a guest. There are a lot of reasons why attending as a guest would be helpful. First, you don't know what's going on and you just want to see what a conference is like. That's totally fine. As long as you've considered the other things first, you can totally just go as a guest. Or if your research group is going, you can tag along with them just as a guest and not necessarily have anything to present yourself. This is a great opportunity. You can see how other people attending conferences make their posters. You can see different people talk, different experts in your field talk about the new cutting edge things that they're doing or they're finding. You can also just go to prepare yourself for a future conference that you might want to attend. Finally, if you do decide to make a submission, you need to consider what type of submission you want to make. So there is more than one type of submission. You can present a poster. However, you can also give a talk if you're an expert in that area, or you can be part of a panel with a symposium. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. But first, before we move on to that, an important note is networking. Now, in psychology, like a lot of different fields, networking is really, really important. And that might be why you want to go to the conference in the first place. You want to show basically the people in your field, your research, and you want to see if anybody is interested in the same things you are. You don't know who you could meet there or what kind of connections you could make. You could possibly meet someone who would be willing to be your mentor going forward in graduate school. And that's the kind of thing that conferences are really for, to make connections between people within the psychological community or within your own psychological subset and getting them together. Networking is probably the most important aspect to conferences, which is why I think that everybody should go. It's not necessarily just about getting to present your research, it's getting the right people to see that you're interested in that and competent in that area. So some of the opportunities, like I said, you can just attend as a guest if you want to see how conferences are done, or if you're just interested in that particular field, or you can attend as a presenter. Like I said earlier, there are many ways you can attend as a presenter. So first, this would be like the classic way to do it, but is to attend as a poster presenter. So you would draft up a poster, like I talked about a few minutes ago, and you present that poster at the conference. This usually involves a poster submission, paying a fee, registering at a certain time, and making sure that all your materials are put in before a certain deadline. You can also attend a symposia. A symposium. So symposia are just panels, basically. A group of experts sit on a panel and they talk to an audience that's interested in their field. So for symposia, if you are an expert, say there's a very niche part of psychology that you're really interested in and you've done a lot of research in. This usually more pertains to grad students, postdocs, and doctors, but you might be part of a project that's very niche. So you might be more of an expert than a lot of other people within the general field of psychology. So you would be on this panel where you talk between like 60 and 90 minutes, doing like a Q&A session of how things work in this area. I'm not very familiar with symposia myself, but just know that it's an option that you can take, maybe not now, but possibly in the future. Also, you can just give a regular talk. So some conferences have flash talks, some conferences have longer talks. A flash talk is just like a 5 to 10 minute oral presentation where you give a really quick, brief rundown of what research you're doing right now. And usually this is accompanied with a PowerPoint. So like Elise talked about earlier, how to make one, you'd have to make a PowerPoint, talk about it very quick. I'm also not very familiar with talks, but if you are an expert in a particular thing and you would want to make a bigger impact than giving a poster, then you could sign up for a talk. Finally, if you're interested in honing a very particular skill, some conferences offer workshops, and that's just to look at a very specific part of a conference or a very specific part of psychology and work on that. So those are all different opportunities that are present at a lot of conferences. For the most part, there will always be poster presentations and there will always be talks. Sometimes there are symposia, very rarely there are workshops. Finally, like I said earlier, now with things becoming a little more versatile, you can decide whether you want to do this in person and online. You can present posters online. I've done it plenty of times. The experience is a little bit different, and I think the in-person experience is probably the most useful. However, if for whatever reason you think that you can't afford to or you don't want to present in person, you can submit poster presentations online and do them online, at least at this time. Finally, we talked a lot about posters, so let's talk about what the requirements are for submitting a poster. So you want a unique title, talked about that a little bit already. You want to list out all the authors who are taking part in the creation of this poster. The authors here aren't necessarily the same authors who are working on your project. So this might be a more condensed list of the people working on your overall project, but this, you want to consult your PI when talking about the authors and the author order. If you're the one making the poster submission, you're probably going to be first author, but everybody who comes afterward, it's important to talk to your PI to give the right amount of respect and credit where it's due. So this would be something that you want to talk about with your lab. Finally, an abstract. Some conferences require more than one abstract. So usually that would be an abstract for the general public attending the conference. They can look at your abstract and see, oh, is this poster for me? Is it not? Or they can see, or the second abstract would be ones for the reviewers. So that usually tends to be a little bit longer, a little bit more detailed. So this would just be a regular abstract that you would write for like a research paper. Usually they're between 100 and 500 words long. The specific conference you attend will give you specifications for what they want in the abstract and what information they want you to put there. So that will all be specified. Also, you want to specify a specific subject area. So for me, I do social psychology, specifically internet research regarding social media use. So it's usually not going to be that specific, but it might say like, hey, are you looking at social psychology or personality psychology or cognitive, whatever? You'll put that subject area down to tell other people what type of project you're going to be submitting for, and so that the reviewers know as well. Finally, there are different types of submissions. So not all submissions have to be data that's already been collected. You can have proposed research that you want to do in the future, or with data that you've already collected that you haven't analyzed yet. That would be more of a proposed research route. Those are very valid, and they're often, a lot of conferences have a specific submission just for proposed research. So that's also a very valid way of attending a conference and disseminating research that way. But usually the most standard form of submission would be like a data collection one where the data has already been collected, it's already been analyzed, the paper's already under, you're already writing a manuscript for publication, or it's already been published, and you're just putting that specific information out there at this conference. So yeah, that's,
We have a question in chat.
oh, do we? Are you normally chosen to speak during a seminar session, or is it something you request to do? I'm going to a conference that both has a poster session and a seminar session, so I was just wondering. Okay, so when you choose, when there's someone speaking during a seminar, you always request that. They're never going to put you on the spot and say, hey, by the way, you need to speak about this topic. It's something you elect to do, and you usually have some kind of application process for that. So usually there's a submission requirement for when you're about to speak. So you would submit like, I'm interested in talking about this area, and you have like an abstract or a paper component, and then they say yes or no. So if you haven't submitted something saying that you're interested in speaking, they will not have you speak. Could you do a proposal kind of seminar, or do you normally have to? Ooh, that is a great question. I don't know, honestly. There are a lot of things you can do at conferences. What I've seen typically is that proposed research is usually just with poster sessions. You don't usually have proposed research with an oral presentation component. So does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Are there, yeah, of course. Any other questions? I'm more than happy to talk about conferences, posters. Elise can talk more about, PowerPoints and presenting if you're interested in that. But yeah, if you guys have any other questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them.
I actually had another question, if you guys can hear me.
All right, guys. If there's no more questions, we're going to close this out. But if you do have any questions after reviewing this, you are more than welcome to contact the SAM Lab, and we can get back to you with answers as soon as possible as well.
Can you hear me? No, okay.
I'm not sure if they can hear us.
I don't think they can hear us. I was gonna try to let them know you had a question, but I don't think.
Okay, yes, yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I didn't have a question, but somebody else did, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess you guys didn't hear me the first time. So I actually just had another question. Do you guys have any good tips about networking? Like, I know in the past people always brought business cards. But is that something people still do? Like, what's the best way? Just any good tips in terms of networking at conferences in particular?
I don't know exactly what the business card, but I always say it never hurts to sometimes just have a updated resume on you. If someone wants to see what interests you're into, it's always very helpful for them to have your contact information. They know what kind of research you've been looking at, and your experience. So I say it never hurts to keep a couple copies on you, because at least I feel from like a student sense, I really don't expect many students to have business cards on them. That would be my advice. Do you have any other advice, Johnny?
Yeah, I can try. Yeah, so I would say that it would be most of the best networking done, in my experience, which is limited. I want to throw that out as a caveat, but most of my experience is that you go to a conference and you present something and someone just happens to see your paper and your poster and they're interested in it. Usually these conferences have so many people that it's hard to like specifically target someone, but it's usually more of like a chance-based thing. Like you could go out and talk to people you're interested in and say, oh, here's my resume, I'm interested in working in this area, or like I've done some research on you in particular, and I think I'd be a good fit in your lab in the future. But usually they come to you after looking at a poster that you've done in your specific area, and they're interested in your research, and that's usually the best time to like get your foot in the door and say, oh, I'm interested in this as well. Here's the research I've done. And then, you exchange contact information. They'll usually tell you what university they're working at. And you can usually figure out from there, like, their name and university, you'll know how to contact them. And what you can do is you can send them a follow-up email talking about your research, or talking about their research, or presenting your personal interests or what you want to do with them. So that would be like the more traditional avenue. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Anything else?
I just had a quick question. Would we be able to get a copy of this PowerPoint?
Yeah, so I think we're going to post this PowerPoint on the SamLab website. And there are workshops from other workshops that we're also going to post on the SamLab website that are going to be super helpful. So like, I think most of our stuff is like talking about how to use Excel or R or SPSS. So looking at specifically data analytics stuff. So that will all be up on the SamLab website, including a recording of this workshop. So if you want to review this at any time, you're totally welcome to do it there.
All right, thank you. Is the physical, I guess, like the online version of the PowerPoint, or is it just the recording that we would be able to look at?
I believe it's this recording.
Okay.
I'm sure you could send us an email if you want this PowerPoint, or you could. So here, I will put. How do you get a text box up here? But you can just send out my email or your email, and we can share this with you if you're interested. Just send us an email. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions or comments?
Sorry, just one more from me. My keyboard is not working, so I can't put my email in the chat. I don't know if that's what you meant, but is there? I don't know why, but it's not.
We put our email in the chat, so you can
Okay.
email us, and we'll send it to you. I think Elise put her email up there.
Thank you.
Yeah, and she'll also put the SamLab one. So we won't close this Zoom room right now. So if you want either of those emails, you're more than welcome to like write it down or copy it and file it for future use.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.